Hi everyone, I'm Shelly and you're watching There's No Place Like Home. I'm back with another video and today is actually going to be a little different. I have talked about the book The Smoky God, A Voyage to the Inner World several times, usually in my Question the Narrative videos, and I actually used it with a read aloud as a read aloud for my children in our homeschool. And since this is a public domain book and many people have not read it yet, I thought it would be fun if I would create a series of videos in which I am reading it to you. And it's going to come with some commentary from me because that's how I do read alouds with my children. That's how I'm going to do them here. Because although I find this book to be fascinating, yeah, there are some aspects of it that I would tend to disagree with, and you can be sure that I'm going to interject that. So anyway, this book was written by Willis George Emerson in 1908, and I'm just going to read the back of the book to you. It says, The Smoky God is an Edwardian-era Hollow Earth fantasy novel, presented as a true story. The narrator, Olaf Jansen, voyages through a polar opening in 1829 and spends 2 years in a strange underground world believed to be the original Garden of Eden. This inner earth is lit by its own sun, and here underground civilization has diverged from the ways of the surface. Here are giants, monsters, omnipotent high priests, and lost races that speak Sanskrit, a world of wonders which Olaf will be lucky to survive. This edition includes the original color illustrations, which you will not see because you can't see my book, from the serialization in the National Magazine. So one thing that the first bit of commentary I'm going to give you is that they call it a fantasy novel, but I believe that it's because they couldn't present it any other way. It wouldn't have gotten published. And as we will find later on in the book, not in today's reading, but the narrator actually was imprisoned for telling his story of what happened to him. He was placed in a lunatic asylum. So I think that is why this book is being published as a fantasy novel for that very reason. Even if it is a fantasy novel, I find it just as interesting. So today I'm going to read you part one, the author's foreword. Now there are many footnotes in this book, and when I find the footnotes to be pertinent, I will share them with you, but some of them are rather long-winded and I don't think that they really add to the story. So in those cases, I'm not going to read the actual footnotes. I'm hoping to create a video every week. I believe there are 6 parts to this book. 7. Okay. And I'm hoping to be able to do it once a week until this is completed. So let's get started. I fear the seemingly incredible story which I am about to relate will be regarded as the result of a distorted intellect superinduced possibly by the glamour of unveiling a marvelous mystery, rather than a truthful record of the unparalleled experiences related by one Olaf Jansen, whose eloquent madness so appealed to my imagination that all thought of an analytical criticism has been effectually dispelled. Marco Polo will doubtless shift uneasily in his grave at the strange story I am called upon to chronicle, a story as strange as a Munchausen tale. It is also incongruous that I, a disbeliever, should be the one to edit the story of Olaf Jansen, whose name is now for the first time given to the world, yet who must hereafter rank as one of the notables of earth. I freely confess his statements admit of no rational analysis, but have to do with the profound mystery concerning the frozen North that for centuries has claimed the attention of scientists and laymen alike. However much they are at variance with the cosmographical manuscripts of the past, these plain statements may be relied upon as a record of the things Olaf Jansen claims to have seen with his own eyes. 100 times I have asked myself whether it is possible that the world's geography is incomplete, and that the startling narrative of Olaf Jansen is predicated upon demonstrable facts. The reader may be able to answer these queries to his own satisfaction, however far the chronicler of this narrative may be from having reached a conviction. Yet sometimes even I am at a loss to know whether I have been led away from an abstract truth by the ignis fatui of a clever superstition, or whether heretofore accepted facts are, after all, founded upon falsity. It may be that the true home of Apollo was not at Delphi, but in that older earth center of which Plato speaks, where he says Apollo's real home is among the Hyperboreans, in a land of perpetual life, where mythology tells us two doves flying from the two opposite ends of the world met in this fair region, the home of Apollo. Indeed, according to Hecataeus, Leto, the mother of Apollo, was born on an island in the Arctic Ocean far beyond the north wind. It is not my intention to attempt a discussion of the theogony of the deities, nor the cosmogony of the world. My simple duty is to enlighten the world concerning a heretofore unknown portion of the universe, as it was seen and described by the Old Norseman Olaf Jansen. Interest in northern research is international. 11 nations are engaged in or have contributed to the perilous work of trying to solve Earth's one remaining cosmological mystery. There is a saying, ancient as the hills, that truth is stranger than fiction, and in a most startling manner has this axiom been brought home to me within the last fortnight. It was just 2 o'clock in the morning when I was aroused from a restful sleep by the vigorous ringing of my doorbell. The untimely disturber proved to be a messenger bearing a note, scrawled almost to the point of illegibility, from an old Norseman by the name of Olaf Jansen. After much deciphering, I made out the writing, which simply said, "Am ill unto death. Come." The call was imperative, and I lost no time in making ready to comply. Perhaps I may as well explain here that Olaf Jansen, a man who quite recently celebrated his 95th birthday, has for the last half-dozen years been living alone in an unpretentious bungalow out Glendale Way, a short distance from the business district of Los Angeles, California. It was less than 2 years ago, while out walking one afternoon, that I was attracted by Olaf Jansen's house and its home-like surroundings, toward its owner and occupant, whom I afterward came to know as a believer in the ancient worship of Odin and Thor. There was a gentleness in his face, and a kindly expression in the keenly alert gray eyes of this man who had lived more than 80 years, and withal a sense of loneliness that appealed to my sympathy. Slightly stooped, and with his hands clasped behind him, he walked back and forth with slow and measured tread that day when first we met. I can hardly say what particular motive impelled me to pause in my walk and engage him in conversation. He seemed pleased when I complimented him on the attractiveness of his bungalow, and on the well-tended vines and flowers clustering in profusion over its windows, roof, and wide piazza. I soon discovered that my new acquaintance was no ordinary person, but one profound and learned to a remarkable degree, a man who, in the later years of his long life, had dug deeply into books, and become strong in the power of meditative silence. I encouraged him to talk, and soon gathered that he had resided only 6 or 7 years in Southern California, but had passed a dozen years prior in one of the Middle Eastern states. Before that, he had been a fisherman off the coast of Norway, in the region of the Lofoten Islands, from whence he had made trips still farther north to Spitzbergen, and even to Franz Josef Land. When I started to make my leave, he seemed reluctant to have me go, and asked me to come again. Although at the time I thought nothing of it, I remember now that he made a peculiar remark as I extended my hand in leave-taking. "You will come again?" he asked. "Yes, you will come again some day. I am sure you will. And I shall show you my library and tell you many things of which you have never dreamed, things so wonderful that it may be you will not believe me." I laughingly assured him that I would not only come again, but would be ready to believe whatever he might choose to tell me of his travels and adventures. In the days that followed, I became well acquainted with Olaf Jansen, and little by little he told me his story, so marvelous that its very daring challenges reason and belief. The old Norseman always expressed himself with so much earnestness and sincerity that I became enthralled by his strange narrations. Then came the messenger's call that night, and within the hour I was at Olaf Jansen's bungalow. He was very impatient at the long wait. although after being summoned I had come immediately to his bedside. "I must hasten," he exclaimed, while yet he held my hand in greeting. "I have much to tell you that you know not, and I will trust no one but you. I fully realize," he went on hurriedly, "that I shall not survive the night. The time has come to join my fathers in the great sleep." I adjusted the pillows to make him more comfortable, and assured him I was glad to be able to serve him in any way possible, for I was beginning to realize the seriousness of his condition. The lateness of the hour, the stillness of the surroundings, the uncanny feeling of being alone with the dying man, together with his weird story, all combined to make my heart beat fast and loud with a feeling for which I had no name. Indeed, there were many times that night by the old Norseman's couch, and there have been many times since, when a sensation rather than a conviction took possession of my very soul, and I seemed not only to believe in, but actually see the strange lands, the strange people, and the strange world of which he told, and to hear the mighty orchestral chorus of 1,000 lusty voices. I'm just going to interject my first bit of commentary just to say that this map is very similar to what is described in this book. But as someone who believes in biblical cosmology, I do believe that it is not spherical, but that it is very possibly a level plane with a hollow area underneath it that he traveled to. This is something more akin to what I believe, but I'm just going to remind you that the illustrations that I'm putting up here, for the most part, are what is describing what is being spoken of in the book. But yeah, every now and then I am going to tell you, okay, this is where I might see things a little bit differently. And this is the first time, I'm actually surprised, it took a while for me to just kind of let you know what's going through my head right now. But I'm going to pick back up now where I left off. For over 2 hours he seemed endowed with almost superhuman strength, talking rapidly and to all appearances rationally. Finally he gave me into my hands certain data, drawings, and crude maps. "These," said he in conclusion, "I leave in your hands. If I can have your promise to give them to the world, I shall die happy, because I desire that people may know the truth, for then all mystery concerning the frozen Northland will be explained. There is no chance of your suffering the fate I suffered. They will not put you in irons, nor confine you in a madhouse, because you are not telling your own story, but mine. And I, thanks to the gods Odin and Thor, will be in my grave, and so beyond the reach of disbelievers who would persecute." And again, I'm just going to interject here that doesn't that fit right in with what we talk about in my Question the Narrative videos? People who provide information for others, who share information at that point in time, usually around the 19th century, that they didn't want others to know, they would typically put them in these lunatic asylums, which is exactly what happened to the man in this book. And again, is why I think that it's very possible that this is not a fictional tale. It may have some embellishments, but it may not actually, but I don't believe that it's completely fictional. Picking back up to where I left off, without a thought of the far-reaching results the promise entailed, or foreseeing the many sleepless nights which the obligation has since brought me, I gave my hand, and with it a pledge to discharge faithfully his dying wish. As the sun rose over the peaks of the San Jacinto, far to the eastward, the spirit of Olaf Jansen, the navigator, the explorer, and worshipper of Odin and Thor, the man whose experiences and travels, as related, are without a parallel in the world's history, passed away, and I was left alone with the dead. And now, after having paid the last sad rites to this strange man from the Lofoden Islands, and the still farther northward Ho, the courageous explorer of frozen regions, who in his declining years, after he had passed the 80 mark, had sought an asylum of restful peace in sun-favored California, I will undertake to make public his story. But first of all, let me indulge in one or two reflections. Generation follows generation, and the traditions from the misty past are handed down from sire to son. But for some strange reason, interest in the ice-locked unknown does not abate with the receding years, either in the minds of the ignorant or the tutored. With each new generation, a restless impulse stirs the hearts of men to capture the veiled citadel of the Arctic, the circle of silence, the land of glaciers, cold wastes of waters, and winds that are strangely warm. Increasing interest is manifested in the mountainous icebergs, and marvelous speculations are indulged in concerning the earth's center of gravity, the cradle of the tides, where the whales have their nurseries, where the magnetic needle goes mad, where the aurora borealis illumines the night, and where brave and courageous spirits of every generation dare to venture and explore, defying the dangers of the farthest north. One of the ablest works of recent years is Paradise Found, or The Cradle of the Human Race at the North Pole, by William F. Warren. In his carefully prepared volume, Mr. Warren almost stubbed his toe against the real truth, but missed it seemingly by only a hair's breadth, if the old Norseman's revelation be true. Dr. Orville Livingston Leach, a scientist, in a recent article says, "The possibilities of land inside the earth were first brought to my attention when I picked up a geode on the shores of the Great Lakes. The geode is a spherical and apparently solid stone, but when broken is found to be hollow and coated with crystals. The earth is only a large form of a geode, and the law that created the geode in its hollow form undoubtedly fashioned the earth in the same way." In presenting the theme of this almost incredible story, as told by Olaf Jansen and supplemented by manuscript maps and crude drawings entrusted to me, a fitting introduction is found in the following quotation. "In the beginning God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void. And also God created man in his own image. Therefore, even in things material, man must be godlike because he is in the likeness of the Father." Going to interject that I don't believe that we don't have like that. We're not God. So just have to point that out there. Okay. "A man builds a house for himself and family. The porches or verandas are all without and are secondary. The building is really constructed for the conveniences within." Olaf Jansen makes the startling announcement through me, a humble instrument, that in like manner God created the earth for the within, that is to say, for its lands, seas, rivers, mountains, forests, and valleys, and for its other internal conveniences, while the outside surface of the earth is merely the veranda, the porch, where things grow by comparison, but sparsely, like the lichen on the mountainside, clinging determinedly for bare existence. Take an eggshell, and from each end break out a piece as large as the end of this pencil. Extract its contents, and then you will have a perfect representation of Olaf Jansen's earth. The distance from the inside surface to the outside surface, according to him, is about 300 miles. The center of gravity is not in the center of the earth, but in the center of the shell or crust. Therefore, if the thickness of the earth's crust or shell is 300 miles, the center of gravity is 150 miles below the surface. I just have a few thoughts that I wanted to share here, and that is that this is a good model of what is being described in this book, where the one entrance is here and then the other one is down here. The outer surface is like an eggshell, and so they are looking at it as a globe, and as they're traveling through this entire thing to come out the other end, which we will find out at the end of the book. But let me share what I presume it actually is. So this is a Gleason's map. And if Olaf Jansen traveled from Norway and got into the North Pole area and entered there, it is my belief that rather than going through a hollow sphere, he actually entered the underbelly of the earth, what might be called Sheol, and may have traveled through there, only to come out an exit, or you could call it an entrance, somewhere in the ice wall. That is what my thoughts are. And also, just you're going to hear them talking about gravity in this book a lot. And we need to remember that at the point in time when this was written, this was when heliocentricity was really being pushed. And so some of the explanations that they make for how gravity can work in the hollow earth model that they are actually using for the book. It sounds kind of convoluted, but in the level earth theory, the biblical cosmology theory, it makes complete sense with density, that it would still work just the same that it does inside in the underbelly as it would on the outside. Okay, I'm just going to pick up the rest. In their logbooks, Arctic explorers tell us of the dipping of the needle as the vessel sails in regions of the farthest north known. In reality, they are at the curve on the edge of the shell, where gravity is geometrically increased, and while the electric current seemingly dashes off into space toward the phantom idea of the North Pole. See what I mean? Yet this same electric current drops again and continues its course southward along the inside surface of the Earth's crust. So this is just one of those things where you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. That's my thoughts on this. Continuing on. In the appendix to his work, Captain Sabina gives an account of experiments to determine the acceleration of the pendulum in different latitudes. This appears to have resulted from the joint labor of Parry and Sabina. He says the accidental discovery that a pendulum, on being removed from Paris to the neighborhood of the equator, increased its time of vibration, gave the first step to our present knowledge that the polar axis of the globe is less than the equatorial, that the force of gravity at the surface of the earth increases progressively from the equator toward the poles, which I don't agree with. I'm just reading what it says to you. Okay, so just moving on. According to Olaf Jansen, in the beginning, this old world of ours was created solely for the within world, where are located the four great rivers, the Euphrates, the Pison, the Gihon, and the Hiddekel. These same names of rivers, when applied to streams on the outside surface of the earth, are purely traditional from an antiquity beyond the memory of man. On the top of a high mountain, near the fountainhead of these four rivers, Olaf Jansen, the Norseman, claims to have discovered the long-lost Garden of Eden, the veritable navel of the earth, and to have spent over 2 years studying and reconnoitering in this marvelous withinland, exuberant with stupendous plant life and abounding in giant animals, a land where the people lived to be centuries old, after the order of Methuselah and other biblical characters. A region where 1/4 of the inner surface is water and 3/4 land, where there are large oceans and many rivers and lakes, where the cities are superlative in construction. Does that sound familiar? And magnificence, where modes of transportation are as far in advance of ours as we with our boasted achievements are in advance of the inhabitants of darkest Africa. And I have to say that to me, that description really does sound an awful lot like what we see when we see the buildings that are sometimes called Tartarian or that are products of the Millennial Kingdom, just some sort of ancient, advanced civilization. It sounds very similar to what is being described in this book as being underneath the earth. The distance directly across the space from inner surface to inner surface is about 600 miles less than the recognized diameter of the Earth. In the identical center of this vast vacuum is the seat of electricity, a mammoth ball of dull red fire, not startlingly brilliant, but surrounded by a white, mild, luminous cloud, giving out uniform warmth, and held in its place in the center of this internal space by the immutable law of gravitation. I would say probably more electromagnetism. This electrical cloud is known to the people within as the abode of the Smoky God. They believe it to be the throne of the Most High. Does that sound familiar? Olaf Jansen reminded me of how in the old college days we were all familiar with the laboratory demonstrations of centrifugal motion, which clearly prove that if the earth were a solid, the rapidity of its revolution upon its axis would tear it into 1,000 fragments. And just adding, good thing we know that the earth isn't moving. The Old Norsemen also maintained that from the farthest points of land on the islands of Spitzbergen and Franz Josef Land, flocks of geese may be seen annually flying still farther northward, just as the sailors and explorers record in their logbooks. No scientist has yet been audacious enough to attempt to explain, even to his own satisfaction, toward what lands these winged fowls are guided by their subtle instinct. However, Olaf Jansen has given us a most reasonable explanation. The presence of the open sea in the Northland is also explained. Olaf Jansen claims that the northern aperture, intake or hole so to speak, is about 1,400 miles across. In connection with this, let us read what explorer Nansen writes on page 288 of his book, I have never had such a splendid sail. On to the north, steadily north, with a good wind, as fast as steam and sail can take us. An open sea, mile after mile, watch after watch, through these unknown regions. Always clearer and clearer of ice. One might always say, how long will it last? The eye always turns to the northward as one paces the bridge. It is gazing into the future. But there is always the same dark sky ahead, which means open sea. Again, the Norwood Review of England, in its issue of May 10, 1884, says, we do not admit that there is ice up to the pole. Once inside the great ice barrier, a new world breaks upon the explorer. The climate is mild, like that of England, and afterward balmy as the Greek Isles. Some of the rivers within, Olaf Jansen claims, are larger than our Mississippi and Amazon rivers combined, in point of volume of water carried. Indeed, their greatness is occasioned by their width and depth rather than their length, and it is at the mouths of these mighty rivers, as they flow northward and southward along the inside surface of the earth, that mammoth icebergs are found, some of them 15 and 20 miles wide and from 40 to 100 miles in length. Is it not strange that there has never been an iceberg encountered either in the Arctic or Antarctic Ocean that is not composed of fresh water? Modern scientists claim that freezing eliminates the salt, but Olaf Jansen claims differently. Ancient Hindu, Japanese, and Chinese writings, as well as hieroglyphics of the extinct races of the North American continent, all speak of the custom of sun worshipping, and it is possible, in the startling light of Olaf Jansen's revelations, that the people of the inner world, lured away by glimpses of the sun as it shone upon the inner surface of the earth, either from the northern or the southern opening, became dissatisfied with the Smoky God, the great pillar or mother cloud of electricity, and weary of their continuously mild and pleasant atmosphere, followed the brighter light, and were finally led beyond the ice belt, and scattered over the outer surface of the earth, through Asia, Europe, North America, and later Africa, Australia, and South America. It is a notable fact that as we approach the equator, the stature of the human race grows less. But the Patagonians of South America are probably the only aborigines from the center of the earth who came out through the aperture usually designated as the South Pole, and they are called the giant race. And I've got to say that Northern Europeans are also fairly tall, and they are certainly taller than people who do live at the equator. And so it would make sense too if they were coming out of the northern aperture. Olaf Jansen avers that in the beginning, the world was created by the great architect of the universe. I'm going to admit, I'm adding this in myself. That sounds very Freemason-like to me, because isn't that what they call their God? Anyway, so that man might dwell upon its inside surface, which has ever since been the habitation of the chosen. They who were driven out of the Garden of Eden brought their traditional history with them. The history of the people living within contains a narrative suggesting the story of Noah and the ark with which we are familiar. He sailed away, as did Columbus, from a certain port to a strange land he had heard of far to the northward, carrying with him all manners of beasts of the fields and fowls of the air, but was never heard of afterward. Obviously, this is not being written from a Christian perspective, but again, Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. On the northern boundaries of Alaska, and still more frequently on the Siberian coast, are found boneyards containing tusks of ivory in quantities so great as to suggest the burying places of antiquity. From Olaf Jansen's account, they have come from the great prolific animal life that abounds in the fields and forests and on the banks of numerous rivers of the inner world. The materials were caught in the ocean currents or were carried on ice floes, and have accumulated like driftwood on the Siberian coast. This has been going on for ages, and hence these mysterious boneyards. On this subject, William F. Warren, in his book already cited, pages 297 and 298, says, "The Arctic rocks tell of a lost Atlantis, more wonderful than Plato's. The fossil ivory beds of Siberia excel everything of the kind in the world. From the days of Pliny at least, they have constantly been undergoing exploitation, and still they are the chief headquarters of supply. The remains of mammoths are so abundant that, as Gratacap says, the northern islands of Siberia seem built up of crowded bones." Another scientific writer, speaking of the islands of New Siberia, northward of the mouth of the river Lena, uses this language: "Large quantities of ivory are dug out of the ground every year. Indeed, some of the islands are believed to be nothing but an accumulation of drift timber, and the bodies of mammoths and other antediluvian animals frozen together. From this we may infer that during the years that have elapsed since the Russian conquest of Siberia, useful tusks from more than 20,000 mammoths have been collected." But now for the story of Olaf Jansen. I give it in detail, as set down by himself in manuscript, and woven into the tale. Just as he placed them are certain quotations from recent works on Arctic exploration, showing how carefully the old Norseman compared with his own experiences those of other voyagers to the frozen north. Thus wrote the disciple of Odin and Thor. And that ends today's reading. I'm hoping to get part 2 up next week, but I hope that you have enjoyed it thus far, and that's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one either here or over on Instagram. And if you like my work and would like to check out my Patreon page, I will leave a link in the description box for that as well. And I hope you have a great day.